All right, hi everybody, Dr. Cheryl Meyer. I'm reading George MacDonald's The Princess and the Curdie. So go to the playlist if you want to get more, but you can always start here. I was roller skating today, so I came to where I skate, and it's just gorgeous. The sun setting. Let me make sure I got it on the ocean. There are people that walk by here, but we'll just deal. Hopefully, I'm not in their videos. All right, let me double check this. Do you want the sun setting or the ocean? They're in two different spots today. Well, I can do this. Oh, go ahead. All right, I will cover this up for. Okay, so I just want to read more, so I keep finding time to do it because I want to read more in the story and I don't want to go ahead of us. So I try not to get kids in. All right. So we were in the middle of this chapter because I had a meeting I had to get to last time. We're in chapter 8, the end of 8. So the princess, the great-great-great-great-grandmother, Irene, says, "You have not half got to the bottom of the answers I have already given you. That paw in your hand now might almost teach you the whole science of natural history, the heavenly sort, I mean." "I will think," said Curdie, "but oh, please, one word more. May I tell my father and mother about it, all about it?" "Certainly, though perhaps now it may be their turn to find it a little difficult to believe that things went just as you must tell them." "They shall see that I believe it all this time," said Curdie. "To tell them that tomorrow morning you must set out for the court, not like a great man, but just as poor as you are. They had better not speak about it. Tell them also that it will be a long time before they hear of you again, but they must not lose heart. And tell your father to lay that stone I gave him last night in a safe place, not because of the greatness of its price, although it is such an emerald as no prince has in his crown, but because it will be a news bearer between you and him. As often as he gets at all anxious about you, he must take it and lay it in the fire and leave it there when he goes to bed. In the morning he must find it in the ashes, and if it be as green as ever, then all goes well with you. If it has lost color, then things go ill with you. But if very pale indeed, then you are in great danger, and he must come to me." "Yes, ma'am," said Curdie. "Please, am I to go now?" "Yes," answered the princess, and held out her hand to him. Curdie took it, trembling with joy. It was a very beautiful hand, not small, very smooth, but not very soft, and just the same to his fierce taut touch that it was to his eyes. He would have stood there all night holding it if she had not gently withdrawn it. "I will provide you a servant," she said, "for your journey, and to wait upon you afterwards." "But where am I to go, ma'am, and what am I to do? You have given me no messages to carry, neither have you said what I am wanted for. I go without a notion whether I am to walk this way or that, or what I am to do when I get I don't know where." "Curdie," said the princess, and there was a tone of reminder in his own name as she spoke it. "Did I not tell you to tell your father and mother that you were to set out for the court? And you know that lies to the north. You must learn to use far less directions than that." Direct directions. "You must learn to use far less direct directions than that." This is life, right? "You must not be like a dull servant that needs to be told again and again before he will understand. You have orders enough to start with, and you will find as you go on, and as you need to know, what you have to do. But I warn you that perhaps it will not look the least like what you may have been fancying I should require of you. I have one idea of you and your work, and you have another. I do not blame you for that. You cannot help it yet, but you must be ready to let my idea, which sets you working, set your idea right. Be true and honest and fearless, and all shall go well with you and your work, and all with whom your work lies, and so with your parents, and me too, Curdie, she added, after a little pause. The young miner bowed his head low, patted the strange head that lay at the princess's feet, and turned away. As soon as he passed the spinning wheel, which looked in the midst of the glorious room, just like any wheel you might find in a country cottage, old and worn and dingy and dusty, the splendor of the place vanished, and he saw but the big bare room he seemed at first to have entered, with the moon, the princess's moon no doubt, shining in at one of the windows upon the spinning wheel. Chapter 9. The Hands. All right, here's a picture. I kind of feel like I ought to be in the video somewhere. Let's see. All right, I'll just read right here. Oh! I'm not quite in it. Curdie went home. Chapter 9. It's called Hands. Curdie went home, pondering much, and told everything to his father and mother. As the old princess had said, it was now their turn to find what they heard hard to believe, if they could not be able to trust Curdie himself. Here we go. If they had not been able to trust Curdie himself, they would have refused to believe more than half of what he reported. Then they would have refused that half too, and at last would most likely for a time have disbelieved in the very existence of the princess, what evidence their own senses had given them notwithstanding. For he had nothing conclusive to show in proof of what he told them. When he held out his hands to them, his mother said they looked as if he had been washing them with soft soap, only they did smell of something nicer than that, and she must allow it was more like roses than anything else she knew. His father could not see any difference upon his hands, but then it was night, he said, and the poor little lamp was not enough for his old eyes. As to the feel of them, each of his own hands, he said, was hard and horny enough for two, and it must be the fault of the dullness of his own thick skin that he felt no change on Curdie's palms. Here, Curdie, said his mother, try my hand and see what beast's paw lies inside it. No, mother, answered Curdie, half beseechingly, half indignant. I will not insult my new gift by making pretense to try it. That would be mockery. There is no hand within yours but the hand of a true woman, my mother. You are my son, and may know all the bad there is in me. Then at once Curdie took her hand in his, and when he had it, he kept it, stroking it gently with his other hand. Mother, he said at length, your hand feels just like that of the princess. What? My horny, cracked, rheumatic, old hand with its big joints and its short nails all worn down to the quick with hard work, like the hand of the beautiful princess. I'm wondering if I ought to. I don't have a cover yet for these. I haven't posted any of them. Why, my child, you will make me fancy your fingers have grown very dull indeed, instead of sharp and delicate, if you talk such nonsense. Mine is such an ugly hand, I should be ashamed to show it to any but one that loved me. But love makes all safe, doesn't it, Curdie? Well, mother, all I can say is that I don't feel a roughness or a crack or a big joint or a short nail. Your hand feels just and exactly as near as I can recollect. And it's not now more than 2 hours since I had it in mine. Well, I will say, very like indeed to that of the old princess. Go away, you flatterer, said his mother, with a smile that showed how she prized the love that lay beneath what she took for its hyperbole. The praise even which one cannot accept is sweet from a true mouth. If that is all your new gift can do, it won't make a warlock of you, she added. Mother, it tells me nothing but the truth, insisted Curdie, however unlike the truth it may seem. It wants no gift to tell what anybody's outside hands are like, but by it I know your inside hands are like the princess's. And I am sure the boy speaks true, said Peter. He only says about your hand what I have known ever so long about you, Joan. I'm going to move. So the people. Shoot. I don't. All right. Okay. Oh, shoot. All right. Okay. I'm sure the boy speaks true, said Peter. He only says about your hand what I have known ever so long about yourself, Joan. Curdie, your mother's foot is as pretty as a foot as any lady's in the land, and where her hand is not so pretty, it comes of killing its beauty for you and me, my boy. And I can tell you more, Curdie. I don't know much about ladies and gentlemen, but I am sure your inside mother must be a lady, as her hand tells you, and I will try to say how I know it. This is how. When I forget myself looking at her as she goes about her work, and that happens oftener as I grow older, I fancy for a moment or two that I am a gentleman, and when I wake up from my little dream, it is only to feel the more strongly that I must do everything as a gentleman should do, or ought, you know. I will try to tell you what I mean, Curdie. If a gentleman, I mean a real gentleman, not a pretended one, of which sort they say there are many above ground. If a real gentleman were to lose all his money and come down to work in the mines to get bread for his family, do you think, Curdie, he would work like the lazy ones? Would he try to do as little as he could for his wages? I know the sort of true gentleman pretty near as well as he does himself. And my wife, that's your mother, Curdie. She's a true lady. You may take my word for it. For it's she that makes me want to be a true gentleman. Wife, the boy is in the right about your hand. Now, father, let me feel yours, said Curdie, daring a little more. No, no, my boy, answered Peter. I don't want to hear anything about my hand, or my head, or my heart. I am what I am, and I hope growing better, and that's enough. No, you shan't feel my hand. You must go to bed, for you must start with the sun. It was not as if Curdie had been leaving them to go to prison or to make a fortune, and although they were sorry enough to lose him, they were not in the least heartbroken or even troubled at his going. As the princess had said, he was going to go like the poor man he was. Curdie came down in the morning from his little loft, dressed in his work clothes. His mother, who was busy getting his breakfast for him, while his father sat reading to her out of an old book, would have had him put on his holiday garments, which she said would look poor enough amongst the fine ladies and gentlemen he was going to. But Curdie said he did not know that he was going amongst ladies and gentlemen, and that as work was better than play, his workaday clothes must on the whole be better than his play day clothes. And as his father accepted the argument, his mother gave in. Oh, here. When he had eaten his breakfast, he took a pouch made of goat skin with the long hair on it and filled it with bread and cheese and hung it over his shoulder. Then his father gave him a stick he had cut for him in the wood, and he bade them goodbye rather hurriedly, for he was afraid of breaking down. And as he went out, he caught up his mattock and took it with him. It had on the one side a pointed curve of strong steel for loosening the earth and ore, and on the other a steel hammer for breaking the stones and rocks. Just as he crossed the threshold, the sun showed the first segment of his disk above the horizon. We're getting the sunset. He's getting the sunrise. He had to go to the bottom, chapter 10, the heath. He had to go to the bottom of the hill to get into a country he could cross, for the mountains to the north were full of precipices, and it would have been losing time to go that way. Not until he had reached the king's house was it any use to turn northwards. Many a look did he raise as he passed it to the dove tower, and as long as it was in sight. But he saw nothing of the Lady of the Pigeons. On and on he fared, and came in a few hours to a country where there were no mountains more, only hills with great stretches of desolate heath. Here and there was a village, but that brought him little pleasure, for the people were rougher and worse mannered than those in the mountains. And as he passed through, the children came behind him and mocked him. "There's a monkey running away from the mines," they cried. Sometimes their parents came out and encouraged them. "He don't want to find gold for the king any longer, the lazy bones," they would say. "He'll be well taxed down here, though, and he won't like that either." But it was little to Curdie that the men who did not know what he was about should not approve of his proceedings. He gave them a merry answer now and then, and he held diligently on his way. When they got so rude as nearly to make him angry, he would treat them as he used to treat the goblins, and sing his own songs to keep out their foolish noises. Once a child fell as he turned to run away after throwing a stone at him. He picked him up, kissed him, and carried him to his mother. The woman had run out in terror when she saw the strange miner about, as she thought, to take vengeance on her boy. When he put him in her arms, she blessed him, and Curdie went on his way rejoicing. And so the day went on, and the evening came, and in the middle of a great, desolate heath, he began to feel tired and sat down under an ancient hawthorn, through which every now and then a lone wind that seemed to come from nowhere and to go no whither sighed and hissed. It was very old and distorted. There was not another tree for miles around. It seemed to have lived so long and to have been so torn and tossed by the tempest on that moor that it had at last gathered a wind of its own, which got up now and then, tumbled itself about, and lay down again. Curdie had been so eager to get on that he had eaten nothing since breakfast, but he had plenty of water, for many little streams had crossed his path. He now opened the wallet his mother had given him and began to eat his supper. The sun was setting. A few clouds had gathered about the west, but there was not a single cloud anywhere else to be seen. Now Curdie did not know that this was a part of the country very hard to get through. Nobody lived there, though many had tried to build in it. Some died very soon, some rushed out of it. Those who stayed longest went raving mad and died a terrible death. Such as walked straight on and did not spend a night there, got through well and were nothing the worse. But those who slept even a single night in it were sure to meet with something they could never forget, and which often left a mark everybody could read. As that old hawthorn might have been enough for a warning, it looked so like a human being, dried up and distorted, with age and suffering, with cares instead of loves, and things instead of thoughts. Both it and the heath around it, which stretched on all sides as far as he could see, were so withered that it was impossible to say whether they were alive or not. And while Curdie ate, there came a change. Clouds had gathered over his head and seemed drifting about in every direction, as if not shepherded by... Oh, there goes the sun behind the buildings. Suffering with cares instead of loves, and things instead of thoughts. Both it and the heath around it, which stretched on all sides, as far as he could see, were so withered that it was impossible to say whether they were alive or not. And while Curdie ate, there came a change. Clouds had gathered over his head and seemed drifting about in every direction, as if not shepherded by the slow, unwilling wind, but hunted in all directions by wolfish flaws across the plains of the sea. The sun was going down in a storm of lurid crimson, and out of the west came a wind that felt red and hot the one moment, and cold and pale the other. And very strangely it sung in the dreary old hawthorn tree, and very cheerily it blew about Curdie, now making him creep close up to the tree for shelter from its shivery cold, now fan himself with his cap. It was so sultry and stifling. It seemed to come from the deathbed of the sun, dying in fever and ague. A-G-U-E, I forgot how to say that. There's purple clouds behind me. Let's see if I can move it. And as he gazed at the sun, now on the verge of the horizon, very large and very red and very dull, for though the clouds had broken away, a dusty fog was spread all over him, Curdie saw something strange appear against him, moving about like a fly over his burning face. It looked as if it were coming out of his hot furnace heart, and was a living creature of some kind surely, but its shape was very uncertain, because the dazzle of the light all around it melted its outlines. It was growing larger. It must be approaching. It grew so rapidly that by the time the sun was half down, its head reached the top of its arch, and presently nothing but its legs were to be seen, crossing and recrossing the face of the vanishing disk. When the sun was down, he could see nothing of it more, but in a moment he heard its feet galloping over the dry, crackling heather, and seeming to come straight for him. He stood up, lifting his pickaxe, and threw the hammer end over his shoulder. He was going to have to fight for his life, and now it appeared again, vague yet very awful. In the dim twilight, the sun had left behind him, but just before it reached him, down from its 4 long legs, it dropped flat on the ground and came crawling towards him, wagging a huge tail as it came. Chapter 11. Lena. Do you remember Lena? It was Lena. All at once, Curdie recognized her. The frightful creature he had seen at the princess's. He dropped his pickaxe and held out his hand. She crept nearer and nearer and laid her chin in his palm, and he patted her ugly head. Then she crept away behind the tree and lay down, panting hard. Curdie did not much like the idea of her being behind him. Horrible as she was to look at, she seemed to his mind more horrible when he was not looking at her. But he remembered the child's hand and never thought of driving her away. Now and then he gave a glance behind him, and there she lay flat, with her eyes closed and her terrible teeth gleaming between her two huge forepaws. After his supper and his long day's journey, it was no wonder Curdie should now be sleepy. Since the sun set and the air had been warm and pleasant, he lay down under the tree, closed his eyes, and thought to sleep. He found himself mistaken, however, but although he could not sleep, he was yet aware of resting delightfully. Presently he heard a sweet sound of singing somewhere, such as he had never heard before, a singing as of curious birds far off, which drew nearer and nearer. At length he heard their wings, and opening his eyes saw a number of very large birds, as it seemed, alighting around him, still singing. It was strange to hear song from the throats of such big birds, and still singing, with large and round, but not the less bird-like voices. They began to weave a strange dance about him, moving their wings in time with their legs. But the dance seemed somehow to be troubled and broken, and to return upon itself in an eddy in place of sweeping smoothly on. And he had soon learned, in the low, short growls behind him, the cause of the imperfection. They wanted to dance all around the tree, but Lena would not permit them to come on her side. Now Curdie liked the birds, and did not altogether like Lena, but neither nor both together made a reason for driving away the princess's creature. Doubtless she had been a goblin's creature, but the last time he saw her was in the king's house and the dove tower, and at the old princess's feet. So he left her to do as she would, and the dance of the birds continued, only a semicircle, troubled at the edges and returning upon itself. But their song and their motions, nevertheless, and the waving of their wings began at length to make him very sleepy. All the time he had kept doubting every now and again whether they could really be birds. And the sleepier he got, the more he imagined them something else. But he suspected no harm.
Oh, it's harder to read.
Suddenly, just as he was sinking beneath the waves of slumber, he awoke in fierce pain. The birds were upon him, all over him, and had begun to tear him with beaks and claws. He had but time, however, to feel that he could not move under their weight, when they set up a hideous screaming and scattered like a cloud. Lena was amongst them, snapping and striking with her paws, while her tail knocked them over and over. But they flew up, gathered, and descended on her in a swarm, perching upon every part of her body, so that he could see only a huge misshapen mass, which seemed to go rolling away into the darkness. He got up and tried to follow, but could see nothing, and after wandering about hither and thither for some time, he found himself again beside the hawthorn. He feared greatly that the birds had been too much for Lena, and had torn her to pieces. In a little while, however, she came back limping and lay down in her old place. Curdie also lay down, but from the pain of his wounds, there was no sleep for him. When the light came, he found his clothes a good deal torn, and his skin as well, but gladly wondered why the wicked birds had not at once attacked his eyes. Then he turned, looking for Lena. She rose and crept to him, but she was in far worse plight than he, plucked and gashed and torn with the beaks and claws of the birds. Especially about the bare parts of her neck, so that she was pitiful to see, and those worst wounds she could not reach to lick. "Poor Lena," said Curdie, you got all those helping me." She wagged her tail and made it clear she understood him. Then it flashed upon Curdie's mind that perhaps this was the companion the princess had promised him, for the princess did so many things differently from what anybody looked for. Lena was no beauty, certainly, but already the first night she had saved his life. "Come along, Lena," he said. "We want water." So she put her nose to the earth and after snuffing for a moment, darted off in a straight line. Curdie followed. The ground was so uneven that after losing sight of her many times, at last he seemed to have lost her altogether. In a few minutes, however, he came upon her waiting for him. Instantly she darted off again. After he had lost her and found her again many times, he found her the last time laying beside a great stone, and as soon as he came up, she began scratching it with her paws. When he had raised it an inch or two, she shoved in first her nose and then her teeth, and lifted with all the might of her strong neck. When at length between them they got it up, there was a beautiful little well. He filled his cap with the clearest and sweetest water and drank. Then he gave to Lena, and she drank plentifully. Next he washed her wounds very carefully, and as he did so he noted how much the bareness of her neck added to the strange repulsiveness of her appearance. Then he bethought him of the goat-skin wallet his mother had given him, and taking it from his shoulders, tried whether it would to make a collar for the poor animal. He found there was just enough, and the hair so similar in color to Lena's that no one could suspect of it having grown somewhere else. He took his knife, ripped up the seams of the wallet, and began trying the skin to her neck. Trying the skin to her neck. It was plain she understood perfectly what he wished, for she endeavored to hold her neck conveniently, turning it this way and that, while he contrived with his rather scanty material to make the collar fit. As his mother had taken care to provide him with needles and thread, he soon had a nice gorget, I think that's one of those, handkerchief things, ready for her. He laced it on with one of his bootlaces, which its long hair covered. Poor Lena looked much better in it, nor could anyone have called it a piece of finery. If ever green eyes with a yellow light in them looked grateful, hers did. As they had no longer any bag to carry them in, Curdie and Lena now ate what was left of their provisions. Then they set out again upon their journey. For 7 days it lasted. They met with various adventures, and in all of them Lena proved so helpful and so ready to risk her life for the sake of her companion that Curdie grew not merely very fond but very trustful of her and her ugliness, which at first only moved his pity, now actually increased his affection for her. One day, looking at her stretched on the grass before him, he said, "Oh, Lena, if the princess would but burn you in her fire of roses." She looked up at him, gave a mournful whine like a dog, and laid her head on his feet. What or how much he could not tell, but clearly she had gathered something from his words. All right, I think I'll end. Chapter 11 is called More Creatures. It looks like that. It's getting cold, the sun's setting. And I think it's a good time. Much love. Share.